This afternoon is Towards Excellence Accreditation Assessor Surgery. For those of you who don't know me and don't know about my cats, my name is David Elcock. I am the director of the Northwest Skills Development Network, and I'm really pleased to be here with you this afternoon. I have to give an apology before we start, which is that at some point this afternoon, I am expecting a delivery of a new radiator from my house. I have to go and take that delivery, so what I've agreed with Aoife will do is that if that happens during one of our colleagues' presentations, that's fine. It can happen in the background. If it hasn't happened by the time I come to do my presentations, we won't take a break until such point as we need to. So if the delivery comes when I'm in the middle of my session, we'll just pause it there, grab a cup of tea or whatever, and then we'll start the session a few minutes later. I'm really sorry. I did try to rearrange, but I was told that wasn't possible. So hopefully it won't be too big a disruption for us as we progress through the afternoon. So thanks again for joining us. I'm delighted to say that we'll be joined by two colleagues this afternoon as well as myself. We have Lisa Bell, who is a Senior Finance Planning Manager at NHS Norfolk and Waveney ICB, who's going to talk us through a bit of a case study around their assessment process. And then Daryl Cockman, who is the Head of Financial Development at East Suffolk and North Essex at NHSFT, will be joining us a little bit later to talk about what the benefits are of being involved as an assessor. We will be sharing our slides at the end of the session. We'll send those into Aoife and she can send those out to you. I will leave it to each speaker to say whether they want to take questions as they go along or wait till the end. I know different people have different preferences, and we will take it from there. So I know Lisa's on the call. I've had a very brief chat with her. So with no further ado, I shall pass you over to Lisa, who is going to talk about the NHS Norfolk and Waveney ICB experience of being assessed. So thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, David. Okay, I'll just share my slides. We all see that?
Yeah, you're not on presentation mode, Lisa. It's just we can see the things to the side as well.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so yeah, as David said, I'm Lisa Bell, and we've just been through our level 2 accreditation, and I work for an ICB. So in the beginning, we started working on the level 2 accreditation in the autumn of 2023. So I established a working group and we set up monthly meetings, and then we decided to go for the 31st of August for our submission date. So pretty much took a whole 12 months of working through the process from the beginning to getting the accreditation. So we held an initial Teams meeting with the assessors. We had one main assessor and 2 shadow assessors assigned to us. And then our working group had 6 members, and we met in June to set expectations of how the process would run. Quite early on in the process, a private Teams channel was set up on the One NHS Teams channel, with access just for the assessors and the working group, so that we could share correspondence and put all the evidence in one particular place. That was really helpful, rather than having one-to-one emails that maybe not everybody could see. All the information was there and available for everybody to see throughout the process. And then quite early on in the process, we shared our finance staff information to the assessors so that they could plan their interviews around availability, considering that it was summer holiday time. So some of the challenges that might just be for us and myself and my organisation, but I just literally thought of everything that was a little bit difficult through the process. So we decided with the assessors that we'd tackle each bucket one by one, sort of like infrastructure. Once all the information was available, I would upload it onto the Teams channel for review. But then what I was finding was I'd have information for maybe 70–80% of all the different criteria for one area, and then be missing maybe a couple of pieces. So it looked like we were further behind the process than we actually were. So I think in hindsight, if I did it again, just upload all the information as soon as you have each particular criteria met. Get the information there so that the assessors could see how things were running, because at one point it did look like we were never going to meet the deadline, whereas I knew that we would. Again, maybe just me, but I hadn't appreciated how much time it would take to gather the evidence and how many examples would be required. So the assessor pointed out that we probably needed maybe between 3 and 5 pieces of information for each criteria, which was more than I thought. So yeah, in hindsight, again, would have been a little bit more prepared with that. I definitely think this was just me, but I assumed the August submission would mean that we would do all the work, submit at the end of August, and then the assessors would do their work. And that was the opposite way around. So the only thing was that we were doing a lot of the to in and fro in the summer holidays. So by this point, it was myself and the deputy CFO, and then the 3 assessors who were taking us through the final section areas that we needed to look at. And all 5 of us had annual leave over that process, so that made it really difficult. So I think that if I was involved in level 3 and I was doing that, I would definitely choose a different time. That's just me personally, and planning around that. So we have around 50 finance colleagues in the ICB, and the working group had 6 members, so that's like 12%. So I thought that was quite a good coverage. And each one of those 6 people, we all worked in different areas and at different levels, so that was good. However, we didn't have any finance business partners in the group, and I think we really did miss that knowledge around some of the criteria that we had to provide evidence for. So I think that if we did it again, I'd make sure that we had a couple of finance business partners more involved in the process. And then finally, if the criteria was for something that wasn't a formal meeting or process or document, and we were relying on emails and online chats, sometimes that could prove a little bit more difficult to get the evidence together. The next 2 slides are just some useful information that as I was going through this slide pack that came to mind. So some of it you might think is really obvious, but it's really important, I think, to set up the meeting, the assessors with the working group quite early on in the process to start to agree how things will run. Again, through all the guidance, when you're thinking about going for level 2, it talks about needing the level 1 evidence available, and I had it all available, but hadn't really thought about the fact that over the last 3 years since we did level 1, certain things have changed, or some of it did need reworking. At level 2, it isn't necessary to have all the criteria rated green by the assessors. So we didn't have the annual report for finance skills development or a recent perception survey available, but we had all the information there to do the work, but we hadn't implemented them because the organisation was going through a staff reorganisation. People were being made redundant, applying for new jobs. It was just not the right time to do something like that. So we got through that just because there wouldn't have been any benefit in doing those at that particular time. We didn't have an apprentice at the time, so for a couple of the criteria, it was all speculation, and we had to provide evidence that we would, and we do now. And then some of the evidence talked around career conversations. We'd started implementing the work, and we were actually the lead for the East of England region. But again, we couldn't evidence actually having any of the conversations yet because it was a new process that we've started to implement this year. When we were struggling to find certain pieces of information, thinking how do we evidence this, a really useful tool for us was on the One NHS Finance Teams channel. We have our East of England regional section. And within that, anybody who has an accreditation shares their pro formas and some of the information. And that's really useful. I don't know if that's a regional thing or just certain people do it, but if it is available, it's a really useful tool for organisations. I think it's really important that we have senior buy-in. So for level 1 and level 2, I had the support of the deputy CFO. It happened to be different people for both levels, but they were both really instrumental in helping with some of the higher level things that are happening out there that maybe at my level I just wasn't getting involved in. The working group evidence, we had several finance colleagues supporting the process. I don't think it would have been possible for just one person. There's no way I could have done it all in independently myself. So those are the 5 people who really did help. And then the wider finance team as well. I'd say out of our 50 employees, probably around 25% of us are quite involved in one NHS finance in different areas. So whether that's an assessor or joining some of the one NHS ICS groups, because we have several ICS working groups as well, covering different areas. So again, they were really helpful when I was trying to gather evidence. And then we have monthly finance directorate meetings where everybody attends. So they were really good for keeping people updated with the progress and where we needed help. And then the staff interviews, I think, are really important to understanding the culture of the finance directorate. It's really easy to provide the evidence, but I think speaking to the individuals was really helpful for the assessors. Now, they chose to do individual one-to-one meetings over Teams with the staff, and the feedback was really positive. I think it really helped them to understand exactly how our finance team works and our culture. So then if we move on to each different area, so there's a lot of information on here, and I'll share the slides because I know I did quite small. But at the end as well, I'll just show you briefly what the level 2 pro forma, what ours looks like, and I will share that with this slide pack so you can see exactly what information we provided for each of the different areas. So what I've done here is looked at all the different criteria, shown how the assessor rag rated them. So we had 1 amber in there, but the rest were green. And then the columns, the first column is if the evidence that we provided was fine and signed off straight away, then I've marked in there. If it needed a little bit more clarity or just a little bit more information provided, then that's the second column. And then the third is if the assessors ask for more information. And I think it was really useful. And as I go through each slide as well, you'll see that there's certain ones where there's very few that went through after the initial submission of evidence. The assessors had more questions, and I think that was really useful to see that they weren't just accepting the first evidence and challenging us through the process. And then I've added a column in there where I put if I thought the information was challenging to provide. So on this section on the infrastructure, I just had the one that I thought was really difficult, and that's around evidence in the development culture, which we're really strong, I believe, in our organisation. And there was loads of examples that I could find, but I think this is one of those where we don't have anything documented, and that's something to think about in the future so that we could make this stronger so that it's just easier to find it all in one place. For personal development, there was a few that were challenging. So that was more around, we have our appraisal documentation, so that was provided. And I don't know about other organisations, but some of the staff were not keen on the thought of sharing their appraisals. So that's just one minor thing that I struggled with. And then we have PDPs as part of appraisals. But again, we couldn't evidence running 6 monthly meetings across everybody. So everybody has an appraisal, but not everybody had 6 monthly reviews. And then we don't have personal development portfolios. But again, we have all the information that we need to work on that between now and submitting for level 3 to put that into place. And then again, one thing that we do want to work on is around appropriate mentoring and coaching. I think maybe the interviews found, the assessors found that a lot of people knew about it, but not everybody. So it's just about finding the best way to promote those. For professional development, again, we had 1 amber and the rest were identified were green. Again, 3 were challenging. So yeah, trying to evidence on the first one, the accreditation process identified an area that needs developing. So yeah, that was fine. We're just we're working on it, but we need to improve on that one. And then the next one, the second one, again, it was just difficult to evidence because there wasn't like a particular document that you could just provide, or meetings or agendas, but we got through it. And then professional development of the finance function has improved to continuous improvement. Yeah, again, we felt like we were quite strong on that, but it was just difficult to evidence. And again, I feel like that might be something where with the finance business partner input in the future, that would be a little bit easier. Workforce and career, everything was RAB rated green for this one. And we didn't really have too many problems at all providing the evidence. So the first one, I think I just mentioned, we don't have the finance skills development document in place. But we had all the information there to put it in place going forward, so that was fine. And then the last one, that was something that we didn't do. So we were racking our brains trying to think of what we could do to contribute to the website. So we, as part of the working group, gathered a document together just showing our journey into the NHS. So whether somebody had worked in the NHS for their entire career, or we'd started off somewhere else, and just shared that. And then going forward, yeah, we'll see how we can have more impact on that website. For corporate, I think this was the most difficult to evidence for us. See the top three, I've said that it was challenging. And again, it's a theme running through, I think, if because our finance business partners, depending on what area they work in, have different ways of working with the budget managers. That's something for us to look at in the future. But so yeah, we did provide evidence, but it maybe wasn't as uniform as some of the other areas. And then finally, the business controls. So everything's green on here and looks like it was signed off initially after the first review, which it was. And I think that because we got to the end of the process at that point and we kind of knew what the assessors were looking for, that made it a little bit easier to provide the evidence. There was a couple that were a little bit difficult. So yeah, how do you provide evidence of a good working relationship with your internal and external auditors? We just struggled with that one. So we have all the standard reports that will have been produced, but it came to the stage of just asking them to provide a little bit of narrative for us. And that's how we got through that one. The external governance checklist, we didn't know what that was at the start, so we got a copy of it and completed it quite late in the process. And then as we were going through, it was really obvious that it was more for a provider than an ICB. So I think if you were assessing an ICB going forward, maybe just look out for that one and see if there's a more appropriate checklist out there that somebody could complete. And then the final one that we found difficult was around a process of mitigation in place when processes are breached. We found this difficult because we didn't have any breaches. So what I had to do was speak to a colleague in IG and get some narrative from her confirming that we hadn't had any breaches to our system. And then going forward, I think maybe we just need to document something about how we would deal with one in the future. Stop sharing that one and then quickly just share what the Excel document looks like. And then if you have any questions, just shout. Is it showing the level 2 pro forma now?
It is, yes.
Brilliant. Right, yep. So you should all recognise this from your involvement. So what we've done is you've got your narrative there that we provided to the assessors, and this was saved in the Teams channel that I mentioned earlier. And then we'll say what evidence we've provided, and then you've got room for the assessors' comments where they've said what else they'd like to see, and then it's the whole process you can see going from beginning to end. So it'll show the type of information that we provided and where the assessors needed more. And yep, so I've got for each particular one or the narrative that should hopefully help you through the process.
Thank you, Lisa. That was really detailed and really helpful. I've just got a couple of points that I want to make, if that's okay, before we pass it over to colleagues who may have questions for you. But thank you. That was really, really helpful. First up, I would say that I'm slightly surprised to hear you say that your assessors wanted 3 to 5 pieces of evidence per criteria. That seems a heck of a lot of information to me. I'm not going to criticize colleagues because everyone does this in their own way, but I certainly wouldn't be looking for that much evidence. I've got a day job to do, and the idea of wading through whatever it is, 149 criteria, looking at 5 pieces of evidence is a lot of hard work. So I wouldn't want colleagues who are interested in being assessed to be put off by that level of detail. Clearly, the colleagues you were working with had a real ability to focus in on the minutiae, which is great. But I wouldn't want people thinking that's what we'd want for standard. The other thing to say is that in terms of some of the issues you said about struggling to give evidence, I think that was really helpful. Thank you. I think that I certainly recognise some of those from assessments that I've done. I'm just going to sing the praises of an organisation that I'm currently assessing at the moment, which is Stockport Foundation Trust up here in the Northwest. One of the things they've done, which has been really helpful, is to ask around about 15, 16 of their staff to write case studies that show what they've done in terms of their studying, whether they come through the apprenticeship route, what they've done around CPD, a whole range of issues. And then they flagged those case studies against the different criteria and said that if you want to have evidence around someone using the apprenticeship route, you can see James's case study. If you want to have a look at somebody who's been and done lots of training and shared that information with their colleagues, have a look at Joshua's case study, whatever it is. And they've filed those case studies separately. That to me is a really good way of allowing the assessors to see the range of activities that colleagues are doing without having to provide loads and loads and loads of information for each of the separate criteria. So just something for colleagues to think about when you're working with organizations. You might want to suggest that as a way to gather those slightly more difficult to evidence areas. I've got a couple of other points, but I don't want to hog the presentation. So I'm very happy to open it up to questions from colleagues. So please just raise your hand if you've got any questions, and Lisa will do her best to answer them. If she can't, Sophie and I will try to. Wendy, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. That was really useful to see. My question was going to be, but I think you might have actually answered it on the Excel spreadsheet you just shared at the end, but I'm stuck to just my little laptop today, so it's really small without me getting too close to the screen. Where you need to provide extra, so what you'd done initially wasn't satisfying the accreditation, did you get sort of did they provide you with examples of what you could give? It wasn't sort of like go away and see what else you can find, because on that Excel spreadsheet, I think I saw at the end and the assessors column, I think there was writing there that said, for example, like a copy of an appraisal and things like that. So you were guided as to what the additional would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I've mentioned that it was difficult, maybe it just genuinely is difficult, and the case study, it might be an idea for covering some of those. But yeah, they did request certain documents here and there where we'd provided different ones. Have you got this available? Because this will cover it. So yeah, that was really helpful.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. I think that's an important point for colleagues who want to become assessors. It's very, and I'll cover this in more detail in my presentation. It's very much a joint approach. You're not there to examine the other organisation. You're there to work with them to get them to a point when they can actually achieve their accreditation. We're definitely not CQC. We're not external audit. We're not looking to catch people out. We're trying to help them through that process. So I'm really pleased Lisa said that. It'd be very disappointing if the answer would be no. We had to go away and work our own way through it. That's not what we're here for at all. So just to pick up the question from Lorraine in the chat. Yeah, let me just ask Stockport if they're happy for me to share those examples, Lorraine. I'm sure they will be, but I'm not going to say yes without their permission. And I'll send a couple on to Aoife for her to send out to you when we send the presentations out. Are there any other questions from colleagues? Okay, I'm going to ask something which going to put Sophie slightly on the spot, so prepare yourself, Sophie. When Lisa said that not all the criteria need to be green, I think we'd both accept that was definitely the case. But I think we would certainly say that none of them should be red.
No reds. Yeah.
We wouldn't
no
allow
reds.
any red to go through, and we'd probably. I'm not going to give a number today, but I think we'd say there was a limit to how many ambers you could have. If it was more than 3 or 4, I think we'd be saying that you need to go back and have a look at that again. But I think the key point, Lisa, is that yours were only really amber because you hadn't quite got around to delivering them. It wasn't that you didn't have them and had no intention of delivering them. It's just they weren't ready at the time of the assessment. So I think that's something, again, in terms of how we work as assessors, there's something really important about working with the organisation to understand what their position is. Is that fair from your perspective, Sophie?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, David. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then a couple of other things I'd like to say, which is one, Lisa early on mentioned around setting up a Teams channel. I know that Sophie and colleagues and Aoife and colleagues at One NHS Finance are very happy to help with that process, and have done certainly for the assessments that I've been involved in nationally. We've done that through the One NHS Finance Teams process, and that's really helpful. It's probably the best way these days to share evidence. We've been doing this for a while in the Northwest, and I'm old enough to remember going to organisations and being given 5 lever arch files and just left to wade my way through it. It's much easier these days. And then the other thing to say from my point of view, and perhaps cover this in a bit more detail in my presentation, is that point you made, Lisa, around the assessors asked for everything to be given to you when it was all complete in terms of the evidence. Again, I think that's very much down to the individual assessors to agree with their organisations what they want to do. Again, with Stockport, we agreed they'd give us the standard 1 evidence at one point, and then standard 2, and then standard 3, so we could work on it rather than having a rush towards the end of the process. We could work on it as it was ready. But that's down to you as individuals, as assessors, to work out what works best for you with your organisation. Is there anything that you wanted to pick up from Lisa's presentation, Sophie or Aoife, from a sort of a central point of view?
No, I don't think so. As we now ask for the organisations to send through their pro formas kind of filled out without providing the evidence as such, but actually filled out to send to us before we assign, I would say that most of them have most of the evidence already collated, so it shouldn't take so long to upload it. So most assessments I've done have had all the evidence ready at once, but that's not to say you couldn't do it one bit at a time. But hopefully they're being handed over in a position where they've got most of the evidence already gathered. Yeah,
as I say, that's for you as an assessor, to a team, to agree with your organisation what works best for you. But yeah, I think it's helpful to have everything together at one point if you can. Okay, so anybody else got any last questions for Lisa? Nope. Okay, so Lisa, thanks ever so much. That was really helpful. As we've said in the chat, and as Aoife said earlier on, we will share your slides with colleagues if you're happy to do that. And I think that'd be really useful.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you. So what we'll do is we will move on to the second presentation, which is me talking to you about what we're looking for in an assessor. Let me just find my slides. Bear with me a second. So can I just double check that you can see my screen now? Yeah, I'm getting a few nods. Okay.
Yeah.
Just put it into slideshow. Okay, so as you probably saw then, this isn't a very long presentation, so we are going to have time for a bit of a break in a second. So this is just around, if you're interested, I'm assuming you're all interested in being an assessor as you've joined this call this afternoon. This is just some of the skills that we're looking for from the people who do those assessments for us. And I think probably lots of these will have been picked up from some of the points that Lisa's just made. So ideally, we're looking for somebody in a relatively senior role, sort of a strategic finance role. So you've got a good understanding across finance. You understand most of the aspects of what the different jobs entail, and that you're in a position where you've got sort of that strategic overview of what's happening in your organisation, which will then help you with looking at another organisation. Coupled to that, having a breadth of experience is really helpful. So you probably will have worked in a few different parts of the finance team. You'll understand what's involved in management accounts, you'll understand what's involved in financial accounts, and you'll be able to really get to grips with some of the evidence that's being presented to you and understand it in some detail. It's really important, I think, you've got a degree of self-confidence. And when I say an ability to stand firm, what I mean by that is that sometimes you might get some pushback from some fairly senior people in the organization that you're assessing, and you've got to be able to have the confidence to stand on your own 2 feet and say that you're sure that the points that you're making are the right ones. I've said that in the past and kind of glossed over it. I think without giving anything away, Sophie, I think it's fair to say we have had at least one fairly challenging assessment in the past 6 to 9 months where the assessor really has had to, or the assessors really have had to stand their ground and say that they are not happy with the evidence that's being provided. So you really need to be able to do that. And I think that I've not really stressed that in the past, but given that one experience, I think it's something we need to really think about in future. Obviously, you need to understand the Towards Excellence process. It's really helpful if you've been through it with your team and you understand the kind of things that Lisa's just been through with you, so that you are sympathetic, empathetic when the colleagues in the organization that you're assessing say they haven't quite got the information together, but they get it for you, or they can't quite work out what it is that they need. If you've been through the process, you'll understand how difficult it can be, and we'll be willing to give them a little bit of flexibility. Ideally, we'd like to be from an accredited organisation. I think that almost goes without saying now. And I know that there's a bit of a catch-22 there, in that to get accredited, you have to have an assessor. And we're saying you have to be from an accredited organisation to be an assessor. But we'll work with you on that and make sure that we've got the relevant people in place. I think, again, you saw from Lisa's presentation, having a detailed methodological approach. I keep saying I'm going to take that word out of the presentation. I must do that soon. A detailed approach to what you're doing is really helpful, because there is a lot of evidence to gather and to go through and to make sure it's all in the right place and has been appropriately used, and you're happy it's the relevant information. You definitely need enthusiasm and a willingness to commit. We know just how busy everyone is at the moment, just how difficult things are out there. And to take this on over and above those difficult day jobs really does require quite a bit of enthusiasm. And I'm really grateful to you all for joining us today and expressing some sort of interest in being involved. And I think finally, it's really important that you are happy to share your own knowledge. When you're talking to the organizations, let them know what you did when you were being assessed, or what you've learned from other organizations, and to be open to learning from others what it is that you need from them, and what they need from you. So if those bullet points on the screen there sort of summarize you as a character, you as a person, then you'll make the ideal assessor. I think that the other thing that I would say is that Sophie and the team at One NHS Finance, and myself and some of the senior assessors we have around the country, are more than happy to support you in the process. We definitely don't just team you up with somebody and say, off you go, get on with it, and report back when you're finished. It's very much we'll help you with things. Sophie often drops me emails saying, got a query around this particular criteria, got a question about that, is this evidence okay? And it's never a problem for any of us to go back to you and help you with that. I think it's a key part of what we do. It's also why we have a slightly different approach in the north. I just want to stop sharing my screen. It's also why we have a slightly different approach in the Northwest. I'm not sure how many Northwest colleagues we've got on with us today, but we actually have a group in the Northwest that reviews all of the assessments before they go to One NHS Finance, because that helps us to share around the patch what people are doing, some of the good practice that's going on, to support each other. I think that that's something that we've kept in place despite the changes nationally, and we're very, very keen to keep that going. Sophie, is there anything you wanted to add to what we're looking for in terms of people being assessors? Anything that from your point of view that you'd sort of pick out I haven't mentioned?
I don't think so. I think, like I say, it's a supportive process. And I think most people who have done assessments have found it actually really beneficial and rewarding, and actually learn things that they could pinch with pride to take back to their own organisation. So I think it is definitely something worth doing. And I've found quite a few showcases from doing some assessments myself that we can put on to share some of the good practice that's going on nationally. So it's a good way of learning some good things from different organisations across the country.
It definitely is. And in one of these sessions before, one of my colleagues, Suzanne, who works up in the Northwest, has talked with pride about the things that she's stolen from other organisations and introduced into her own as part of that assessment process. So it really is a good way of learning some of the good stuff that's going on out there at the moment. Okay, I'm very conscious we're well ahead of schedule here, and if we don't slow down a bit, we're going to have to wait for Daryl to join us. What I'm going to suggest is, if it's okay, Sophie and Aoife, if we just take a quick take a 5-minute break, people go and grab a cup of tea or whatever it is they want, and we'll start again. Shall we say at 1:45, and I'll then talk you through how I do my assessments. Hopefully that'll be of use to you, and then Daryl will join us and talk about some of the benefits as well. So let's start again at 1:45, and we'll see you then. Okay. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome back. Hope you wanted to grab a cup of tea or a glass of water or whatever it was you went off to get. So what the next presentation is going to be on is perhaps the other side of the coin from Lisa's presentation earlier. I'll talk to you a little bit about how I go about doing an assessment, cover off some of the issues that Lisa mentioned this morning, and some of the sort of the hurdles that might get in the way of actually being an assessor. I'm happy to take questions as we go through. You seem to be quite a quiet bunch, but that's fine. It's not a problem. If you've got questions, just put your hand up during my presentation. I'm happy to sort of break off and take those questions. And then there'll be some time at the end as well. Obviously, I will just, for those of you who weren't with us right at the very start, if my delivery does arrive during my presentation, I'll have to just break off very quickly and go and take that. I'll leave you in the capable hands of Sophie and Aoife at that point. They'll find a way to entertain you, I'm sure. So I will share my screen with you and hopefully you'll be able to see this. If someone can just confirm you can see the introductory slide. Thanks, David. I can see nodding your head. That's really helpful. Thank you. So what I should have said at the end of the last session, by the way, is that you've got my email address on this presentation and in the invitation that Aoife sent out. Please feel free to contact me if you've got questions. You don't have to go through Sophie and the team. You can come straight to me. That's not a problem. Very happy to help in any way that I can. So this is the outline of what I'm going to talk through with you. So the stages of the process of doing the assessment, some of the key factors that I think we need to bear in mind, and then a bit of, as I say, a bit of time for questions at the end of the presentation. So stage one is the bit that Lisa talked about in terms of gathering that initial information. What is it that you as an assessor are expecting from the organisation that you're working with? So I would suggest that you need this ideally at least 2 months before the visit, and we'll come on to the visit later. Lisa made reference to this earlier when she said about the assessors speaking to people via Teams. That's why visit is in inverted commas there. We'll come on to that in a bit. So ideally 2 months before you're due to go to the organisation, you need evidence performers for all the relevant levels. So if you're, and again, Lisa made this very clear, if you're assessing somebody at level 2, you need to see the performance for level 1 and level 2. And at level 3, you need to see all of the performers. Do make sure you're using the most up-to-date performers. They're always available on the 1HS website, and the link is there. I'm sure you're all aware of that anyway. Rather embarrassingly, I did an assessment earlier in the year and realized we'd used a slightly out-of-date set of performers. It was very quickly fixed, but it does save a bit of work if you make sure right from the very start you're using the most up-to-date performers. We've talked a little bit about this. It's important that you agree how you're going to share the information. I would encourage you to speak to Sophie and colleagues about getting a Teams channel set up through 1HS Finance. I did an assessment for Lewisham down in London last year, and they had a really clever system called Smart Sheets, which was sort of like a variation on a spreadsheet you could all work on together, which is really useful. We have had to do big file transfers in the past, hopefully not doing those anymore. And I would very, very strongly encourage against not sharing paper documents, because that would be probably a truckload these days. But they're all possible. They're all possible. I think it's important, and you saw this very clearly from the performers that Lisa shared, that a narrative style approach to those documents is really helpful, rather than just a bullet point list saying, for example, the first criteria in 11A is around the finance director having a professional responsibilities built into their job description. You could just put bullet point, see job description, but it's just helpful to say, yes, this is included. Please see attached for information. Just that approach, so it's not, if it's a little bit easier to read. That's not the best example, but it's a little bit easier to read as an assessor when you're working that through with colleagues. This is the point that Lisa made about it's really important when you're doing that first assessment that you note any shortfalls, any missing evidence, any queries you've got, and raise those with the organisation. And the spreadsheet that Lisa shared is really helpful because it gives you a way of, as an assessor, just putting in one of the columns to the right hand side of the spreadsheet what it is you're missing, what else it is that you need. There are some red lines. I'll come on to those in a minute. Those are the things that absolutely have to be proved to be in place before you can give an organisation a level 2. It's the stuff that Sophie and the team check essentially for all level 1 accreditations. You just need to make sure those are being maintained. I'll come on to those in a second. You saw on Lisa's document the RAG rating. I add a B to that, which is blue, which is evidence where it seems the evidence is really good. So, for example, you've got the organisation have said they've got appraisals in place and they do 6 monthly reviews of those. What I like to do is check that out with the people. When I'm doing my visit, I like to talk to the team and say, talk me through the process. Tell me how that works. Have you all had your 6 monthly appraisal? Do you all have job descriptions? Tell us about the communication style in the team. So you're not, and again, Lisa made this point in her presentation, you're not taking at face value what you're being told. You're checking that out with the organisation. And I think that quite a substantial amount of the evidence, particularly in the personal and professional development sections, will always be blue. There'll always be things that I want to check out with the team on the day of the visit. And just to pick up one point that Lisa had noted in her detailed part of the presentation, was that colleagues were reluctant to share their appraisals. I absolutely understand that, and I would always say to organizations, I don't need to see an appraisal for every single member of the team in detail. I need you to share with me the process, a couple of examples. If people are happy to have the name on there, that's fine. If they'd rather that was redacted, that's fine. But what I'm going to do on the day of the visit is just to make sure that everyone is happy with that part of the process. Again, it's that thing about trying to be helpful, trying to find a way through the process that means that the team feel they're working with you, not you're working to sort of examine them in some way. And then finally, I think it's important that you agree a date with the organisation by when they'll let you have that revised pro forma with all the additional information. It's helpful if you have that at least, I would say, 1 month before the visit, if that's possible. Bearing in mind Lisa's really good point about being aware of people's annual leave and other pressures on the organisation due to commitments with getting returns in, final accounts, and so on and so forth. Just going to pause very briefly there. Hopefully that all makes sense. Has anybody got any questions or points they want to raise about that first part of the process? David.
Yeah, I was just being interested, and you mentioned it before the break as well about the time. I was wondering if you may cover it on later on. I just wondered how much time is involved as an assessor through a process, and what are the key points of the time you need to invest in, obviously the visits and things like that.
Yeah, I will pick that up, David. But yeah, I would say, me personally, I would say it's probably about 5 days in total across the whole process. On the last time we did this session, the one of the presenters said he allowed about 3 days. He's obviously more efficient worker than I am, but somewhere between 3 and 5 days, I think would be the total investment that you need to do. I'll pick up the point about the key dates in a moment, if that's okay. Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to raise at this point? Nope. Okay. So moving on to stage 2. Oh, sorry, no, I was going to go through the red lines, wasn't I? So there are a number of criteria that absolutely have to be shown to be green. Going to Lisa's point about you can have some ambers. The ones I'm going to show you on the next 3 pages absolutely have to be green to go through level 1 and level 2. Please don't worry about taking notes. We'll share the slides. They're all on there. And I think they're quite clear in the process now anyway. And none of these will be a surprise. These are all things that you would expect would have to be in place. Just to pick up on the second bullet point on this page, it did cause a bit of confusion initially. You have to have a declaration signed by the current CFO for the organisation which you are assessing. So if there's a declaration signed by the previous CFO, or the new CFO has brought one with them from their previous organisation, that neither of those are relevant. It has to be a declaration signed by the CFO for the role they're currently in. And then 1.1.K we've introduced some really key things around the One NHS finance process. So you have to show you've got a value maker, you have to show you've got a finance and clinical educator, and so on. You'll see a few of those through this process. Can I come back to your question in a moment, Wendy, if that's okay? Thank you. Second lot of red lines, again, nothing here that I think will be a surprise to anybody. Just going back to Lisa's presentation, it is really key that everyone's got an up-to-date job description that they can share. They've got objectives that they can talk to you about, and they've got some kind of a personal development plan. Again, it doesn't have to be in a certain format. We realized very early on in the process that we have no authority to say to an organization, you have to use this particular documentation. We're very happy to go with whatever works within the organization, but those things have to be in place for every member of the team. And then I'll come back to 1.3 in a second. The development strategy and action plan is really important, and the One NHS finance checklist is key too. Just going to pick up on the on CIMA and CIPFA at the moment, because there are some issues with these. So organizations still can get ACCA accreditation. That's not an issue. With CIMA at the moment, their process is on hold. They are reviewing the way in which they're doing their organizational accreditation. They have said to a couple of organizations in the Northwest that if you had the accreditation in place at the time when they put their process on hold, as far as they are concerned, you are still accredited. You might have difficulty getting that in writing from them, but I think that's a standard that we've adopted now across the Northwest. So if you had that in place, that's fine. In terms of CIPFA, what we say is that they charge something like £200 to become an accredited organisation. We leave you to make a value judgment about that. So if you've got one CIPFA qualified accountant in your team, we perhaps wouldn't be expecting you to spend £200 on getting them through the process. If you've got 10 or 15 CIPFA qualified accountants, clearly it's a small investment to make per person. We'd ask you to have the conversation with the organisation around that, and you come to a judgment about what you think is right for that particular organisation. Going back to Stockport, who I'm accrediting at the moment, they've got one CIPFA employee out of something like 40 staff. So I really wouldn't expect them to be spending all that money, particularly when they've got the ACCA and CIMA accreditations and can show they've got good processes in place. Sophie, again, anything from your point of view on that particular item around the professional qualification accreditation? I think we're in a pretty good place with that now, aren't we?
Yeah, I did hear from someone NHS England recently that CIMA are due to make a statement about their process soon. So as soon as we hear anything about that, we'll update everyone.
That would be really helpful, thank you. Is that like a Department of Health soon, as in it'll be sometime in spring, and spring runs from January to August?
Yeah, I suppose it's been on pause for over a year now, hasn't it?
It has, yeah,
we'll
it has.
see.
Wendy, to come back to your question in the chat about would the system CFO be acceptable, I think that's fine if you as an assessor are happy that the system CFO is the person who is sort of overall in charge of ensuring the professional development of that particular organization. I think again it's horses for courses. I think in the Northwest for our GM system, we'd probably say that we'd need to have an individual accreditation for each organization, because there are something like 15 organizations in GM, and I wouldn't expect the system CFO to have an oversight of every single member of staff in that system. If you're in one of the smaller ones where you've got maybe one ICB and one trust, I think that would work perfectly well. So does that help? I think it's a horses for courses approach. Yeah, you said thank you in the chat. That's helpful. Thank you. Welcome, Daryl. I see you've just joined us. Thank you for that. As you can see, we're a bit ahead of schedule, Daryl. So get yourself ready to do your presentation. In terms of stage 2 of the process, which I referred to before, this would be about 1 month ahead of the date you're going to go and visit. At this point, you have pretty much got a solid set of evidence that both you as an assessor and the organisation are happy with. It's not fixed in stone. You can still change it during the discussions. quite often after I've been for my visit, I'll say to the organisation, you've missed a really important thing you do here. There's something really good that's missing from the evidence. Just make sure you include that. Or we'll pick up something from discussions with the staff and say you need to include this. That's not quite right. It's only fixed in stone once you send it in to one NHS finance colleagues, and we'll come to that part of the process later. And I think this picks up one of the points that Lisa made, which is that if something's not recorded, it's really hard to have that as evidence. So what I would encourage you to do as an assessor is once you start the work with the organisation, just ask them to try and remember to keep copies of emails or chats or whatever it is, just so that you can show that work has happened. The other thing I would say, and I probably should change my slides to reflect this, is that, and this is my opinion, others may disagree with me, an agenda of a meeting doesn't prove anything. It simply proves that the meeting was held and that somebody from the relevant finance team might have been at that meeting. You really need to see the minutes so you can see that the individuals are taking actions on the back of those, on the back of the minutes of the meeting happening, if that makes sense. As I say, the agenda shows nothing. The finance person might have sat at the back of the room, said nothing, might have been on Teams with the camera switched off and looking at Facebook. You really need to show from the evidence that the person's fully engaged in the process. I'm going to move on, because I think that one's fairly straightforward and makes sense. We'll talk next about the actual visit, and don't actually mean an in-person visit, although that would be the best thing to do, in my opinion. So you agree a date when you're going to work with the organisation. Ideally, that would be in person. It gives you a much better way of getting a feel for the organisation, understanding what it's like to work there, seeing some of the things that are in place. However, I do understand that if you are Sean working in Devon and you're asked to assess the trust in Newcastle, a day trip to Newcastle might not be something you'd particularly relish. So you can do that. You can do that via Teams. That would be easier. Sophie and Eva and the team do try and be a little bit sympathetic in terms of where they appoint you to go and do assessments. And if you can, we'll arrange that then, Sean. No problem. If they can arrange for you to be relatively local, they will do. And if you are local, I would definitely encourage those in-person visits. It gives you a real feel for what the organisation is like. During the day, you will need to have sorted out a whole number of different meetings. You'll need to have a bit of a chat with the team who led on the accreditation. So we go back to Lisa's example. If I'd been assessing her organisation, the first thing I'd have wanted to have done on the day would have just been to sit down with Lisa and the colleagues, have a bit of a chat about how the process has been for them, what they're really proud of, what they're slightly worried about, things that they want to point out to us, just to say, when you're doing this, please be aware of X, Y, or Z. If you've selected to talk to somebody who, let's say, is neurodiverse or is in a wheelchair, they can let you know you're going to have to do a few adjustments for that individual. They're very happy to see you, but you need to make sure you're, etc., etc., etc. So you need to have that part of the meeting. You need a chat with the finance director for sure. Particularly at level 3, it's really important that the finance director is part of the process. You will need to see 25% of the team, a minimum of 3 people. That the 25% is the number of staff, excluding the finance director. You should choose the staff that you see as far as you can. What I ask organisations to do is to send me a list of staff who will be available on the day, with their professional status, whether they're studying, the organisation they work for, the organisation that they're qualified with, what they do in the organisation, and then try to get a cross section of staff when we are doing those visits. Sophie, I think we're going to have to revisit this one fairly soon. We've got ever increasing organisation sizes. We now in the Northwest, we've got something called One LSC, One Lancs and South Cumbria, which has got over 300 finance staff. So the idea of sitting down talking to 75 staff in one day is probably a bit difficult. So we need to have a think about some of the logistics around these huge organisations that are developing now. But at the moment, we do say 25%. Lisa said that her assessors wanted to see each individual personally. That's fine. If you've got the time to do that, it is okay to do that in groups. So almost like working groups are seeing 5, 6, 7 people at once. You'll need to use your skills as an assessor to make sure that everybody in the group contributes to you. So you need to make sure you do that. Wow, Daryl, 280 staff is quite impressive. So Daryl's put a comment in the chat there. You can do that any way you wish to, and it does. I think the groups work better, but obviously for Lisa's assessors, it was easier to do it in individually. For level, you need to speak to non-finance staff, preferably budget holders. At least 2 for level 2 and at least 3 for level 3. You can see more if the organisation wants to put more people up to speak with you. I mentioned Lewisham earlier. Lewisham were very brave in that they put one of their more critical budget holders forward, but that actually led to a really good discussion around what they did well and what they could improve. And actually, I think the team found that really helpful. At level 3, you will need to speak with the chief exec. That can be 10, 15 minutes. It's just to give you an idea of what the chief exec thinks of the finance team, how they're part of the organization, how important they are to that organization. It's a really key interview for level 3. And then we'll come back to this in a minute, but you need to have a final meeting where you sit down with probably the team that led on the accreditation and the senior finance staff who've been involved in that to give them the outcome of the day as part of that process. There's a guidance document available on the website. There are sample questions in there of the sort of things you should be asking. You don't have to ask every question that's listed. You would literally be there all day with one group if you were to do that, I think. But there are just some ideas there of the sort of things you might want to ask. I think it's really important to remember that they are discussions. You're not interviewing the teams. You're not holding their feet to the fire. You're having a chat with them around how things feel for them being part of that organization. And then my final tip would be, if you're doing it by teams, you definitely need to set each meeting up as a separate meeting on Teams. The first time I tried to do an assessment via online, we had one meeting set up all day, and it was an absolute disaster because people kept coming in, going out, signing in, signing out. Wi-Fi would drop off. So just make sure that you've got for each group that you're seeing, you have a separate Teams meeting set up. And it goes without saying, allow breaks between the meetings. For goodness sake, don't have meetings from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with no breaks at all. So I'm going to pause there again. That's just how I would run the visit to the organisation. See if anyone's got any questions or any comments or any reflections on how things have been for their organisations. Daryl, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, David. Yeah, it wouldn't be me if I didn't butt in and say something.
No, absolutely not.
Just to add on from what David's saying, when you've got the sort of the clinical staff, what I tend to do, and I feel it works well, is I bring them in to the start of it depends. If you've got the rest of the finance team in one meeting because they're small enough, that's great, but bring them into one of the meetings, because getting that feedback whilst you're there and you're able to listen to it, which in the most part will be positive, I think is really important. So that works really well, and I think the department appreciate getting that feedback, even when, as David says, sometimes there's some constructive, we'd like you to do these things better. It's taken in the spirit for what it is. It's an opportunity, so I guess that would be just a little addition to think about, and that's not, it's not been a problem from my perspective as an assessor.
No, thanks. That's but I've done that a couple of times and it can be really helpful. Yeah, it can be. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you spoke about selecting finance staff to have discussions with, and you have a list of them with their qualifications, etc. For budget holders, do you do a similar thing? Ask for a list of budget holders and those who are available that day, or do the organisations put forward budget holders to you?
So in my experience, it's much easier to do the latter rather than the former, because you've just got no way of knowing who's available.
But yeah,
if they're clinicians, they might get called away to do to something really urgent. So what I tend to do is just ask them to put somebody forward. What we found is that they need to be relatively senior, and preferably you get better conversation with somebody from a clinical background, because they're, to go to Daryl's point again, they're a little bit more willing to be challenging and just to have that conversation, and that can be really constructive. I'm not going to name the organization. I had once I had basically the head of the secretarial pool who was given to me as someone to talk to. They didn't even have a budget, so it was a completely pointless conversation. So you need to have a little bit of a think about who you're speaking to, but it always works best if you let the organisation put their nominees forward.
That's super. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thanks for asking the question. Okay, so moving on to stage 4, which is the outcome. As I said just now, it's really important that before you leave the organisation, you have a conversation with them. To my mind, and I've discussed this with Sophie and the team on a number of occasions, I think there are 3 outcomes. One is that you're successful and the organisation is successful, and you're going to recommend them to be approved. The second outcome is that they're almost successful. There's just a couple of things you need to get clarified. And that happened on my last but one assessment where we're not quite over the line. To go back to what Lisa said this morning, there were perhaps just a couple too many ambers on the list. We had to get a bit more information provided. And we said, if you get that information to us by a couple of weeks' time, we'll still put you forward. And that happened. And the third outcome would be that you're not ready yet. And I think that can be a conversation between you and the organisation. You might want to feed back to the One NHS finance team and just say, I've been out to see X organisation today. They weren't quite ready. They're going to come back for the next deadline. But it's not a failure. It absolutely is not a failure. It's there's just a bit more work to do here to get you over the line, and we'll support you through that process. And I do think it's really important that when you leave, whether that's you actually leave the site or you leave all the Teams calls, the team know exactly where they stand with you and what it is they need to do, either to just get over the line or what the things that are not quite in place, which is why I said they're not ready yet. And good to see you nodding, Daryl. That's reassuring that you take a similar approach to that. Liz.
I just wondered, roughly what proportion would you say of the assessments you've done are initially straight off successful compared to almost successful or not ready?
I would say 95% of them go through at the first time, because it's difficult to say without sounding slightly arrogant, for which please accept my apologies. Because I know what I'm doing in the preparation stage, it means that we don't get to the point when they're being assessed until I know they're ready to go for it, if that makes sense. But there still can be occasions when the evidence just isn't quite what you wanted. There's maybe in some of the conversations on the day, things have come up where staff have said, what's an appraisal? What's a job description? You know, that's never happened to me, but you can envisage a situation where you might just need to gather some more information. But I would say it's around 95% are successful first time, and probably no more than 1 in 100 are, for me, they're not ready to go through at all at this point. Would you agree, Daryl? Would your numbers be slightly different?
I was going to say I haven't had one where I've said they've not been ready. I've had a couple where they've had to have a couple of actions associated with their successful outcome. And, a couple where, the first cut of the evidence showed some gaps, and then, but as long as, it's feedback as you go through the process, and obviously, as David said, they've got time to fill those gaps, and, they've always come back, found that extra evidence. Sometimes a little bit of help. I mean, one of the standards, I think my last one had interpreted it that you actually did a full costing exercise each month, not that you were doing a sort of a regular set of management accounts and some of the statutory accounting associated with it. So we might need to be a bit clearer on that standard going forward. So, but yeah, it's very few and far between then. I know of a colleague of mine who we were discussing one, and they were putting them back by 3 months, but that's once.
Yeah. Thank you, Daryl. Annette.
Thank you. It sounds like you've both done quite a few assessments. So I was just wondering, how many would you normally shadow before you lead on an assessment? And also, how many assessments per annum would you be committed as an assessor to produce?
I'm going to hand this one over to Sophie. I think the more assessors we get, the less the demands are. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sophie. In terms of shadowing, I would say that you definitely wouldn't need to do more than 2. I don't think, and I would think if you could probably do it off the back of having done one if you felt confident enough. But Sophie, sorry, I'm saying I asked you to answer, and I'm answering it myself in my usual style.
Yeah, so I would say if you've done one, when we email out and you say you come back and volunteer to do another, and we would say, are you happy to lead? And some people have said, yeah, I feel comfortable doing that, and I can take a couple of people with me. Others have said, I'd like to do one again with someone who's done one before. So we take everybody's kind of requests into, and in terms of how many do a year, well, that's completely up to you. Again, we email out when we know exactly how many organizations we think are going to go at a certain point, and if you're available, we'll assign you. If you can't do it at that point, then that's fine. And then sometimes I have to go out and beg, depending on how many organizations want to go forward. But again, that's up to the individual.
Thank you, Sophie. Is that a national pool then?
Yeah, so we've historically we've kind of we've had to assess people in different regions because we haven't had enough assessors, but we're getting more and more volunteers now, so we're trying to assess within the region, but that's not always possible, and obviously we don't want to keep organizations waiting if they don't have to, and we've got volunteers from other regions.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for asking that. That's an important question. Okay, moving on. The report. There's a pro forma report on the website which you can use, which I recommend you have a look at. Best practice is to write that report within 2 weeks of the visit. Otherwise, if you're anything like me, that becomes ancient history and you forget all the detail. So it's a good idea to get it written as soon as you can. There are 4 parts to the report, which I'm not going to go through with you because they're on the screen there and you're all perfectly capable of reading. The important part from our perspective as the assessor is the report that you write, and there are very clear guidelines as to what should be included in that report. To head off the inevitable question, yes, I'm very happy to send you a report that I've written recently, and if I can share that with you after the meeting, just to give you an idea of the kind of thing that we're looking at. It's really important that we all understand that all 4 parts of this report are owned by everybody involved in the process. So it's not your report on the organization and then the organization's introduction. It's a report by you that the organization is happy with, an introduction by the organization that you're happy with, an evidence schedule that you're all happy with. It should be from all parties, sending a single document that everyone signed up to, and then you need to make sure that that report is submitted to the central team, by the three national deadlines, which coincide with when the Finance Leadership Council meets to sign the things off. One thing we're very careful of in the Northwest is that we don't say congratulations, you've now passed the assessment. We wait for FLC to come back to us saying, yeah, that's fine, they can count themselves as being accredited. And I think it's fair to say, Sophie, that the central team have taken a little bit more of a keen interest in just making sure that the level 1 and level 2 assessments are carefully monitored by you guys, and you do go through the reports. It's not just a question of sticking them on a pile and presenting to FLC and they just say yes to all of them.
Oh no, I also like to see all the highlights and key strengths of each report, because that's again a good way of sharing some good stuff that's going on. So yeah, we do go through them.
Thank you. Final thing from me this afternoon, so just some key things to bear in mind when you're assessing. So again, it's not a development. Sorry, it is a developmental process. It's not pass or fail. It's helping the organisation get to where they want to get to. To answer David's question from earlier, I would say about 5 days in total. Daryl may have a slightly different figure. So the colleague on the last meeting said it was about 4 days. It depends how quickly you work and what your style of working is, but certainly no more than 5 days per organisation at most. I'm pleased you said, Lisa, that you thought that the senior staff being signed up was a key part of the process, because I absolutely agree. You can't do this without the senior people in the organisation being part of it. As I said before, it's not a CQC visit. They are discussions, not interviews. You are looking to get to an agreed point at the end of it. And then just to go back to the point I made earlier, you are signing everything off with the organisation. You are coming to a joint position at the end of the process. However, if there are things that you're not happy with, you have the final say around just making sure you've got everything that you need in place. I have always said that's never been an issue, given the point I referred to earlier with one organisation at the moment. You will hopefully not in an unpleasant way, but you may be required just to stand your ground and say, I'm really sorry, I need to see this evidence before I'm willing to sign you off. But that's never been an issue for me, I have to say. Looking from Darryl shaking his head, he's never had that problem either. I think it might just have a rogue organisation. I'm going to leave it there before I say something I shouldn't say and get told off by Sophie. That's me done in terms of where we are with the process and what needs to be in place from my point of view. We've got other assessors on the call who might have slightly different approaches, but I think overall that approach is what's worked well for us in the Northwest for a number of years now. Very happy to take any questions, should anybody have them. Annette.
Thank you. So just in terms of next steps then, sorry, how do we now confirm that we do want to go ahead to become an assessor?
You've just done it.
I'd wait to hear Darryl's presentation first. He might change your mind completely. No, I think he's right. If you're happy to do it, Annette, Sophie, no doubt has scribbled your name down and we'll be in touch very, very soon. Yeah,
and also if you you do the form on the ONF website, and then you get the little assessor badge on your profile.
Oh, I've not done that yet. I must do that.
I've probably done it for you, David. I'll check.
You probably have.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have anything else they want to say before we move on to our last guest speaker? Great stuff. Thank you. So, still no sign of my radiator. Let's hope it turns up soon. So finally, I'm delighted to introduce Darryl, who is the Head of Financial Development at East Suffolk and North Essex FT, NHS-FT. Darryl is going to talk to you about the benefits of being involved in an assessor. Clearly, Darryl, Annette doesn't need the session. She's already made her mind up that there's huge benefits involved. So and if I have to dip out, Darryl, you know where I've gone. I will be back as quick as I can. Over to you, sir.
Okay. All right. Oh, thanks for letting me join. I mean, I got involved. I think COVID was already in place, so I've been used to doing everything over Teams, and I totally take David's point that you probably get a slightly different feel. So I think the last few that I've done have been fairly far afield, and I think I had somebody from Newcastle and somebody from Devon on the assessment team. So going to Surrey wasn't really an option. But I mean, the things that I've really got out of it is certainly helps on my accreditation journey. I'm sure David's already said, having an accredited assessor is part of the standard going through levels for yourselves. But stealing with pride has always been one of my watchwords, and I think there's so much stuff that you actually can pick up. So I needed to, for example, do a engagement survey, and we hadn't done one for a year, but obviously with COVID we'd been holding back on doing it, and I picked up one that was quite nice from an organisation, and I just said, can I have it? And they shared it straight away, and it was a great basis. I adjusted it slightly, but it got me 75% of the way without having to do any work. So I think that's one of your significant benefits. It is finding stuff to pinch, but also it's about expanding your network. Picking up people that you might want to talk to in the future. If you want to develop your career, or if you've just got a question or query about the job that you do, you can't beat networks. And if we're all working more flexibly, and so establishing and maintaining networks on one level is more difficult than it was when you all came into an office, you all went to certain places and met colleagues from different organizations. It feels like it's a little bit more difficult and than it perhaps has been in the past, and that the culture of the way in which we do things is slightly different. So for me, this is a real opportunity to find out about different organisations. You never know, you might want a job there at one point. Just reflecting on our level 3, I couldn't stop directors wanting to come on the interview. So obviously they are budget holders, but they were so keen to sing our department's praises. It made life really easy for me. So I don't know what the assessors felt about that, but and our chief exec, you can't shut him up. He's on Radio 4 half the time. So it's good for, I guess, the organisation in terms of getting the opportunity to sing their praises. But for the most part, you're just working collaboratively. You're helping them to demonstrate that they are a great place to work. And it has been collaborative in any kind of assessment that I've done. If people have missed some evidence, they're usually straight on it. Sometimes you have to give them a little bit of an assistance in terms of have you thought about this? It helps if you've already gone through the journey yourself. Obviously, but I'm just starting my second route of level 3, so standards have changed a little bit. So I've got a little bit of homework to do, just to sort of make sure that I can tick all the boxes when we go for reaccreditation. But I've got networks of people. I did a level 3 recently, so I can touch base with them if I feel that I need to once I've done that sort of benchline assessment. So there's just, I guess, so much that you can get from it for, I guess, a relatively, I think for me, 5 days is maximum, especially when you've done 1 or 2. I guess from just trying to think through some of the questions that people were asking. Last couple of times I've taken an assessor overview. So I've had 3 people that are new. So in a sense, I was leading it. They were doing all the work. I was checking in to make sure that, they were happy and they knew what they were doing. But very much letting them drive. I mean, the one thing that I've just reflected on this is that I didn't ask them, well, are you happy to go and lead one now? And perhaps that's what I should have done as a bit of reflection at the end of it. I'm pretty sure they would be, because they were quite confident during the assessment in terms of the meetings and what have you. But I think having somebody who has done a few is really good for, because occasionally they'd come back and say, oh, is this evidence okay? Feels okay with me, but I'd like another opinion. So it's just little things like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd just say, get stuck in, have a go. You'll definitely find stuff that can help you out with your job. You'll make new friends. One of the things that I was going to do quickly, actually, I won't share my screen, but as an Eastern region, we have again tried to put information, as we've got more organisations sort of starting on that accreditation journey, we've got a whole Teams channel on accreditation, and we've got examples from different accredited levels from different organisations. So that is because we've got a number of assessors that have been happy to sort of share, that the organisations have been happy to share. So again, that's another area where I can dip in and go looking for stuff to steal if I feel that I need to. But that's something that you could go back to your systems and see whether everybody would be interested in doing something like that, and then that just helps everybody along the way. And again, by definition, will expand your networks. Not quite sure what else I can say really, but if anybody wants to ask me a question, I'm sure that might allow me to provide some more information.
Darryl, can I just pick up on the point you made there about the Teams channel and sharing information, because Lisa mentioned that as well, and I've mentioned what we do in the Northwest around our Tours Excellence Assurance Group. I think it would be really helpful if people in other parts of the country wanted to develop something similar to either of those, or maybe both, in their part of the world. We'd be very, I'm sorry, I'm speaking for you, Darryl, but I know I can on this occasion. We'd be very happy to support with that, to sort of talk about what we do, to make sure that colleagues are aware of what support's around, because I think in your presentation there, you've absolutely emphasized it's the networking that's key. It's the networking that really makes this slightly onerous task really worthwhile, because you do get to learn so much more by doing it. Would you support the idea that we could maybe get other systems set up in some of the other patches?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely be up for that.
Great stuff.
See, Lorraine, you've got your hand up. Hello, Lorraine.
Hi, Anne. We're always the ones asking questions, aren't we? So just on that, David and Darryl, I was just wondering, we're going to be going for our level 3 accreditation. I've already completed my first shadow assessment last year. Well, it wasn't shadow, I did get involved, but it was my first one. So I was very much newbie, and I've signed up to do another one this year. But I wondered, is there a mentor we can tap into to help us go through the level 3 who's already been through it, Darryl?
You know the answer to that yourself, Lorraine. So,
I know,
yeah,
but just, like, because we got some feedback, and I want to make sure that we've covered everything for our level 2, and from your opinion, it'd be really helpful to have that sort of, are we where we should be from the level 2 for us to get on to level 3?
So I think absolutely. So if we are talking about your own organisation and on that accreditation journey, then part of why we're here is to help and share things with one another. So yeah, we've got 3, I think, at level 3 now, Lorraine. So there's a number of organisations that could reach out and offer an opinion, and I think of those 3 organisations, all of them would be willing to help. We all aspire to get everybody to level 3, and we can do
we're
that.
We're the first region to have all organisations accredited now.
Yes.
So go us. But we feel like we ought to join the party with the level 3. So
yeah.
But we rushed the last one, so that's why I want to make sure our deadline is December. So we need to, because of what you were saying earlier about the summer. So we've got lots of time, but we want to get started soon, because we realise how long it takes.
Okay.
Although I don't think level 3 is going to be as onerous as level 2, hopefully.
Well, yeah. So that would be if we're talking about accreditation at the moment, that level 3 is about proving that all the hard work you've done in level 2 has been embedded. So from a organisational perspective,
stuff that we could do better.
It is slightly less onerous, but you've got to demonstrate that you're making progress. You're dealing with any issues that have cropped up. Well, we're re-accrediting level 3, Lorraine, so we can take this outside this meeting and look about how we can sort of support one another. And I'm looking to get the rest of my system up to level 2.
Thank you very much.
But I think, that's the other thing that you can do as a system. Take your knowledge back as newly trained assessors, and how that can support your organisation to move up the line as well, which is part of why you're here, I would imagine. Sophie, see, you got your hand up. Oh, I said something wrong, have I?
No, I was just going to add to the whole, because we've got quite a few new assessors. What I have done on the Teams platform, where people have been showing evidence, I've created a private channel just for assessors, so new assessors can ask questions of each other and have a bit of a place to just ask other assessors about certain standards if they have any issues. I haven't widely publicised it yet, and it's not really been used yet, but just it was a suggestion from one of the assessors that might be quite useful if people are struggling about what kind of evidence to look for on certain criteria, then they've got a pool of people they can ask.
That's a great idea.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Just to pick up your point, Lorraine, what I would say is, I appreciate it's about getting the timing right and the balance right. Your assessor, assessors, when they're appointed, should be willing to do that kind of thing with you and go through where you're up to with your evidence. Is it all in place? I appreciate you wanted a bit of an early sense check, but if you've got a good relationship with your assessors, that they should be part of that process as well. So don't don't be worried about contacting Sophie and the team and saying, can we have somebody appointed so you can start that process early? I'd rather talk to an organisation for 9-12 months in advance of the submission than get everything dumped on me 3 weeks before the deadline and say, can you have a look at this now, please? That doesn't work for either party, really.
Yeah, that's sensible. Anybody else got any questions for me?
I think you've stunned them into silence, mate.
Hopefully in a good way.
I'm sure.
Just coming back to how many do you do? I think I probably have done one every quarter for probably the last 2.5 years ish. So I did ask Sophie if I could have this quarter off, but I would help out if she was desperate. So she hasn't contacted me yet, so we'll see. But as I say, well, if you're working with a bunch of people that are shadowing, so my interpretation of shadowing is you do all the work and I just help you. So hopefully that's David's nodding. So so don't think shadowing is you're just there for a little bit of a ride, because it's not. You've just got somebody guiding you along the way and making sure that everything's going to hand and can answer those sort of thorny questions if they crop up. Which I think, well, it was really helpful. I was just dumped in it. I didn't even have any training. But that was back in the day when there wasn't enough of us to go around. So,
but yeah, so we have a similar process in the Northwest. So the Stockport one that I'm doing at the moment, there's me and there's 3 colleagues who are working with me. One of those is nominally shadowing, but she's doing as much as everybody else. It's not a question of just sitting back and taking it all in, but it's the way to learn is just to get on with it, really. Okay, Daryl, thank you so much. Thanks for your time as always. That's us concluded. Are there any last minute questions anybody wants to ask of Daryl or Lisa or myself or of Sophie and Aoife around the overall process that's involved? Aoife has very kindly put the assessor form in the chat, so if you are now inspired to sign up, and I hope you are, please complete that. And I have absolutely no doubt at all that somebody from the team will be in touch with you very soon, telling you you're going to go and do lots of work for Daryl while he sits drinking his cup of tea, watching you working really hard on the assessments.
Yeah, that's the way I like it.
Excellent.
What I would say is, David, just to add that we're expecting about 20 organisations to kind of want to be assessed ahead of April, and in the end we only got 9 and 1 wasn't quite ready. So most of those have been set up with assessors and shadow assessors this time round. So but we have got another 12 hoping to go over the summer, so I can start to appoint people to summer organisations if they are interested.
I'll bring you in a second, Wendy. What I would say, Sophie, is that for the first time for a long time, we're actually struggling a bit in the Northwest. So if there are colleagues in particularly Yorkshire or West Midlands who want to get involved in some of the stuff that we're doing in the Northwest, contact Jackie, and I'm sure she'll be very happy to allocate colleagues to those organisations. We do prefer to do face-to-face visits in the Northwest, so you would need to be able to get to the relevant parts of our patch, but we can certainly, if you have spare assessors, we can happily use them up.
We have spare new assessors, not experienced ones. That's what we're lacking in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wendy.
I think that all ties in rather nicely with my questions to Sophie. I was just going to ask, but you've just alluded to that you think you've got spare newbie assessors, because I was expecting to have an email from you to say to shadow, but I haven't. So I'm keen to get started, basically, is where I'm at. But just wanted to make sure it hadn't been overlooked, that was all.
No, I've provisionally put you down for an organisation who didn't have quite a lot of things in place, so I've gone back to them and asked them to refill their pro forma to resubmit. So if they get that back in time to be assessed shortly, then
that's fine.
Then I have provisionally, but you're not quite there yet, that organisation.
That's fine, thank you.
It's a bit of a way from Telford to Northwest, Wendy, but if Sophie can't use you, give me a shout and see what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Liz.
I just wanted to check if your organisation, as the one I work for, is accredited to level 1, can you only then assess organisations going for level 1, or can you assess? Right, okay. So I could assess someone for level 2 or level 3, even though we're only level 1 ourselves.
And going back to Daryl's point, that's a really good way for you then as an assessor to take stuff back into your organisation, saying,
Yeah.
hey, I saw this at organisation X. Why don't we do that here?
Yeah.
And even just literally not stealing, but taking stuff back from that organisation, saying, I've got this. Let's just change the letterhead and we can use it in our organisation. That's one of the real benefits to me of going through this process.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Stealing with permission.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. If there are no more questions, we will draw this to a close. Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you for the questions. I hope it's been useful. Lisa and I will make sure that Aoife has a copy of our presentations to share with you. I will send a copy of a recently completed report for you to have a look at. I will speak to Stockport and ask for their permission to share some of those case studies with you. And as always, if you've got questions, come direct to me or to Daryl or to anybody else. Go through Sophie, whatever you need to do to ask those questions. We're here to support you. It is genuinely a good network to be part of, and we're very pleased to have you on board. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your 20 minutes of bonus time, and I will catch up with you all soon.